My name's Eliza Matthews, I'm 32. And if you've ever worked your entire life to win the approval of someone who refuses to give it, then you already know a bit of my story. Before I get into it, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, and if you've ever had to stand up for your own worth, hit that like button and subscribe. You never know. Maybe my story will give you the final push you've been waiting for. So, I grew up in one of those old money suburbs, just outside Boston. Think big colonial homes, manicured lawns, families that looked perfect from the street but cracked like thin ice when you stepped inside. My father, Richard Matthews, was the self-made man of the neighborhood. He'd built his real estate company from a small family lot into a multi-million-dollar development empire, and he never let us forget it. For my dad, everything in life boiled down to results, status, and control. He wasn't the dad you see clapping from the school auditorium seats or helping with homework at the kitchen table. He was the dad standing behind you, arms folded, telling you that your B+ should have been an A, that your second-place trophy didn't mean anything because you didn't win. My mom, Caroline, was his opposite when he wasn't around. Gentle, warm, someone you could actually breathe next to. But the second he walked through that door, she'd shrink. It was like she handed him the remote control to her personality. The way she'd look at him before she answered a simple question, like she was scanning his face for permission to speak. It took me years to even realize how strange that was. I thought it was normal. There were 3 of us kids, James, me, and Sophia. James was 3 years older, and the heir apparent. Football star, strata student, the kind of guy who never had to try too hard because he just got it. He just knew what Dad wanted. James knew when to brag, when to keep quiet, when to laugh at Dad's stale jokes about the real estate game. To me, it seemed like he was born speaking Dad's language, while I was stuck guessing every single word. Then there was Sophia, 2 years younger than me, yet somehow so much wiser when it came to navigating Dad's moods. She was never the superstar, never the captain, but she had this gift. She could read a room like nobody else. She knew when to speak up to lighten the tension and when to quietly slip out of the way. Sophia was the glue, the peacemaker, the one who'd sneak into my room after Dad ripped into me for something ridiculous, just to whisper, "Hey, it's not that bad. You're okay." But me, nothing was ever enough. Not the top of my class diploma in high school, not the full ride to Cornell, not the double part-time jobs I juggled to keep my grades up. I'll never forget telling Dad I'd decided on Cornell. His reaction: "Why not my alma mater? You think you're better than my legacy?" It was always like that in college. While my friends interned for pocket money, I was grinding behind a cash register or tutoring on the side. Still, when I'd come home for break, Dad would just look at me and say, "So what exactly do you plan to do with that?" As if my whole existence was a line item that didn't balance out. After graduation, he offered me a half-baked job at his company, a pity gig, and I knew what that meant. I'd always be the charity case. So I turned it down and moved to New York City with nothing but 2 suitcases, a half-furnished plan, and the stubborn belief that I'd make it on my own. I slept on my best friend's couch for 3 months, sent out resumes like my life depended on it, because it did, and eventually landed an entry-level job at Goldman Sachs. When I called him to tell him, his only words were, "Let's see if you last a month." Well, guess what? I lasted a lot longer than a month. I stayed 8 years. Climbed the ladder without any fancy introductions, no family name to open the doors. Just me, staying late, getting the work done. And yeah, I'd be lying if I said it wasn't partly just to prove him wrong. Just last month, I got the biggest promotion of my life. Senior investment strategist, the youngest one they've ever had. I got a corner office, a huge bump in my salary, and for the first time, I looked at my bank account and realized I'd finally made it by any normal standard. So what did I do? Did I celebrate with a vacation? Put money aside for my future? No. I took almost an entire year's salary and bought my father a car, a shiny, black top-of-the-line Mercedes S-Class. Why? Because he'd once mentioned in passing that one of his golf buddies had one, and in my head, that was it. If I could hand him the keys to that dream car, maybe, just maybe, he'd finally say what I'd always needed to hear. "Eliza, I'm proud of you." Looking back now, I see how pathetic that was. Buying someone's love with a leather-wrapped steering wheel and fancy badging. I'd turned every milestone into a bargaining chip, proof I'd kept stuffing into a vault that never existed. It wasn't about the car. It was about a 32-year-old woman trying to buy something every child should have for free: unconditional love. That year, the Matthews family reunion fell right before Father's Day, just like always. It's our tradition. Dad holds court at the estate, makes his rounds with the big shots from his business circle, and we all pretend to be this perfect dynasty. But this time, I thought it would be different. This time, I had my big gift. This time, he'd have to see me. But the funny thing is, I wasn't the only one carrying a secret that weekend. There was something else in my purse besides the car keys. A little envelope, sealed shut, that held the reason why he never loved me. I didn't know it yet, but by the end of that dinner, that envelope would crack my entire world wide open. The day before the reunion, I drove that brand new Mercedes over to my parents' house in the suburbs. I'd arranged for it to be delivered to a nearby dealership so I could do this whole reveal properly, like it was going to be some big movie moment. Mom was out at her garden club meeting, which was perfect. I wanted it to be just me and him. Maybe I was still clinging to this fantasy that if he saw it privately, away from an audience, he might actually say thank you and mean it. When Dad opened the door, he looked the same as always, pressed shirt, sweater draped over his shoulders, like he'd just come from the country club. He glanced at his watch as if I'd shown up late for an appointment. "Eliza, you're early. The reunion's tomorrow." "I know," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I wanted to give you your Father's Day gift early." I handed him this small, perfect box with the silver Mercedes emblem on it. For a split second, I saw something in his eyes, surprise, maybe even a flicker of pleasure. But it was gone as fast as it came. He popped the box open, stared at the key, then looked at me like I'd just given him a stray dog. "Is this some kind of joke?" "Come look," I said, leading him over to the big front window. There it was, parked in his driveway, sleek, black, polished to a mirror shine. He stood there for a moment, saying nothing, just taking it in. I held my breath. Was this it? Was this finally going to be the moment he'd turn to me, smile, clap me on the shoulder like he did with James, and say, "I'm proud of you, kid"? Nope, he just shook his head and muttered, "This is excessive, Eliza. What are you trying to prove?" But even as he said it, he was already grabbing the key and heading for the door. That's Dad for you. Never says what he wants, never asks permission, he just takes. He walked around that car twice, ran his hand over the hood like he was inspecting a new investment property. He peppered me with questions. What's the financing? Insurance? Maintenance costs? It felt less like gratitude, and more like an audit. After the world's shortest test drive, during which he complained the steering felt loose, mind you, on a brand new Mercedes, he parked it in the garage. Out of sight, no display in the driveway, no pride. No thank you. Just, "You must be doing well to waste money like this." He turned and walked away while I stood there feeling like I'd just set fire to my own dignity. That night, I sat in my hotel room staring at the ceiling, while my best friend Taylor listened to me vent over speakerphone. Taylor had heard all the stories over the years, the constant barbs, the backhanded compliments, the little ways he made me feel small. "Take the car back," she said. "He doesn't deserve it, Liz. You don't owe him anything." I laughed it off. Of course, I wasn't going to take it back. I was still clinging to that ridiculous hope that tomorrow, in front of the entire family, he'd put on a good show. Maybe he'd brag about his successful daughter. Maybe the car would be some shining proof that I'd finally made him proud. Before we hung up, Taylor's voice dropped to that serious tone she gets when she's about to tell me something I don't want to hear. "Just promise me you won't show him that test." I glanced at my purse, where that sealed envelope sat like a grenade. "I won't," I lied. "It's not the right time." But the truth was, I wasn't so sure anymore. That test was like an escape hatch I didn't know if I wanted to crawl through or blow up behind me. When Sunday came, it felt like the universe was mocking me. The weather was perfect, blue sky, sunshine, not a cloud in sight. The kind of day where you'd expect a picture-perfect family photo on the lawn. Instead, I was white-knuckling the steering wheel, replaying every past reunion in my head. The subtle digs, the polite conversations that turned to cold shoulders, the little ways Dad reminded me that I didn't measure up. I pulled into that long, tree-lined driveway I'd known since childhood. The one lined with maple trees that dropped gold leaves every fall like they were showing off. There it was, the Mercedes, but instead of tucked away in the garage, Dad had parked it right out front for everyone to see. I should have felt proud, but all I felt was a dull ache. It wasn't me he was showing off, it was the car. I sat there for a minute, breathing in and out, checking my makeup in the rearview mirror. My dress was perfect, navy blue, fitted but not flashy, just enough gold jewelry to look polished. I'd spent 3 weekends picking out an outfit that would scream successful but tasteful, all to live up to an image I didn't even believe in anymore. Mom answered the door. She pulled me into a hug before I could even put down my purse. "You look beautiful, darling," she whispered. She was so warm, so soft, the way she only ever was when Dad was out of earshot. "Your father's in the garden with the Petersons," she added, her eyes flicking toward the back patio like she was pointing out an incoming storm cloud. Inside, the house was buzzing. Cousins, aunts, family friends, the same people, the same gossip, the same fake smiles. Aunt Linda grabbed me first. Air kisses, questions about my love life, all spoken just loud enough for eavesdropping ears. Uncle George boomed, "There's our Wall Street wizard." The sound of that alone probably gave Dad hives. He hated when anyone implied I'd built this life on my own. I spotted Dad moving through the room. 3 business buddies trailing behind him, all big handshakes and fake laughs. He didn't see me at first, then our eyes met across the crowd. And just like that, he looked straight through me. A quick nod, the same nod he gave the caterer or the gardener. Then he turned to whisper something to Mom. I was invisible, all over again. I pasted on my best networking smile and talked to anyone who'd listen, but my chest was tight the whole time. That envelope felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Sophia found me near the window, her timing perfect as always. "I heard about your promotion," she whispered, pulling me into a hug that was too real for this fake room. "You're amazing, Liz, truly." I almost told her then. About the test. About how the truth was burning a hole through my purse. But instead, I just said, "Thank you," and took the glass of wine she handed me. Out on the driveway, I could see Dad holding court, showing off the Mercedes to the Petersons like he'd worked his whole life for it, laughing, pointing out the features, popping the trunk like a proud salesman. I watched him run his hand along the hood and realized he'd never once done that to my shoulder. Never patted me on the back like that. Never once said, "This is mine," about me. Sophia appeared at my elbow, following my gaze through the window. "He's been out there all afternoon," she murmured, her voice low enough that only I could hear. She handed me another glass of wine, which I accepted gratefully. 3 different tours for 3 different groups. Mother said he's practically bragging about it. I let out a bitter laugh. Not about me, though, just the car. Sophia's eyes softened, and she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Liz, I know you're hoping he'll see you. But you know this already, he can't. Not in the way you want him to." I turned to look at her. She'd always been the peacemaker, the soft buffer between Dad's harshness and reality. Her saying this hit me differently. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, chewing on her lip like she was weighing how much truth I could handle. "I mean, it's not you, it's him. Something in him is broken when it comes to you specifically. I don't think he even knows how to see you." Her words slipped through the cracks in my armor, lodged somewhere deep. I wanted to brush them off, but they felt true. My chest tightened around that truth. I nodded, staring back out the window at Dad. He was laughing at something Walter Peterson said, leaning on the car like he'd built it with his own 2 hands. The same hands that had never clapped me on the back after any award, any promotion. He'd never once called me brilliant, or resilient, or even enough. The sealed envelope in my purse felt like it was vibrating. A quiet threat, a secret that could set me free or blow everything apart. A soft chime sounded from the dining room, Mother's way of announcing that dinner was ready. The ritual that was the Matthews family dinner would begin, just as polished and predictable as ever. I followed the flow of relatives through the hall, moving like I was watching a movie of my own life. The dining room looked like something out of a lifestyle magazine, sparkling crystal glasses, perfectly arranged flowers, antique silverware that hadn't seen a real meal in years. Every seat had a name card in Mother's graceful handwriting, but the arrangement itself always told the story. James and his wife sat next to Dad, of course. Sophia and her husband across from them. I found mine far down the table, between a cousin's husband I barely knew and one of Dad's business associates. Out of the spotlight, out of the way. The staff placed the first course in front of us with military precision. Scallops with microgreens, so delicate I could have swallowed them whole. Dad stood at the head of the table, raising his glass. Instantly, the room fell silent. He had this power when he spoke. Everyone listened. "Family," he began, his voice smooth and commanding. "And dear friends." Every year, I'm reminded how fortunate I am not just to have built a successful business, but a family that represents my legacy. His eyes did that slow sweep around the table, touching briefly on each face that mattered. James got a nod and a proud smile. Sophia, a gentle warmth that said he saw her, really saw her. When his eyes slid past me, they didn't even pause. I might as well have been the centerpiece. He continued, offering a special welcome to the Petersons, his favorite business partners. He toasted James for his real estate projects, Sophia for her volunteer work. Then came the line that always stung, but tonight it was a blade. True family success, he said, swirling his wine, comes from staying the course. From building upon proven foundations rather than chasing empty accolades. His eyes flicked in my direction for just a heartbeat, enough that everyone knew who he was talking about. My scalp prickled. I felt the familiar flush rise in my cheeks, the same flush I'd felt since I was a kid trying to explain a B+ on a math test. Dinner unfolded the same as always, 5 exhausting courses of cold politeness and passive jabs. Every question lobbed my way was a setup for a backhanded comment. When I answered that my division at the firm had outperformed projections by 22%, Dad waved it off. Numbers on paper. Let's see how that holds up when the market turns. He turned away before I could even answer. James leaned back in his chair, smirking at me like we were 10 years old and I'd just lost at Monopoly again. I excused myself halfway through the fish course, needing air more than food. In the hallway, I caught my reflection in the antique mirror, my face calm, my eyes exhausted. Sophia found me there, reaching for my hand. "Don't let him get to you, Liz," she whispered. "Your model, the one you built at the firm Michael's cousin, says it's already being studied at other banks. They're calling it game-changing." I wanted to believe her, but belief was hard when your entire life had been built on trying to win over someone who saw you as disposable. I was about to thank her when I heard voices coming from the study. The door was cracked just wide enough. Dad's voice floated out. "Yes, Walter. The new car's quite something. When you build something from scratch, like I have, you earn these rewards." My throat tightened. He was talking about the car like he'd bought it himself. Like it hadn't been my promotion, my savings, my desperate offering. Walter Peterson chuckled. "Eliza mentioned she got it for you, said she wanted to celebrate her promotion." There was a silence. Then Dad's voice, each word measured, cold. "The girl's always been desperate for attention. Her success, well, it's because I pushed her. Private schools, college, the right connections. Everything she has is because of what I taught her." I stood frozen in the hallway. The betrayal felt physical, like a slap. He was rewriting my story, erasing every hard-won piece of it. The envelope in my purse burned like it was on fire. I didn't even realize I was backing away until I nearly collided with a side table stacked with framed family photo snapshots of the Matthews family mythology. Dad's proud handshake with James at his graduation. Sophia's wedding day, her head tipped toward Dad's shoulder. Me. A single photo, tucked in the back, half hidden by the others. Me, at age 12, standing stiffly next to my father while he shook hands with a visiting business partner. Like I was just another piece of office furniture. I steadied myself and slipped away before they could notice me eavesdropping. My breath felt sharp in my throat, each inhale burning as if my chest were too tight to hold air. It wasn't the first time I'd heard him dismiss me behind my back, but this felt different, more final, more clear. A sound broke through the pounding in my head. Footsteps. James appeared at the end of the hallway, his posture as rigid as ever, hands tucked into his pockets like he was the king of this house and I was a trespasser. "Eliza," he said, his tone as flat as his expression. A word. I didn't answer but didn't move either. He stepped closer, his eyes flicking, to the closed study door behind me, then back to my face. He lowered his voice to that familiar patronizing register he'd used since we were kids. "Dad says you've been asking Mother some strange questions. About her past. About college. What exactly are you digging for?" For a heartbeat, my stomach clenched with the fear that maybe he knew. But I forced myself to meet his eyes. "Just trying to understand my own family," I said, my voice calm, cool. The same voice I used with clients who thought they could intimidate me. "Isn't that what family's for?" James scoffed lightly, leaning in as if to shield our conversation from any passing guests. "Whatever game you're playing this performance, these gifts, your probing questions, drop it. The family works because we keep certain things in place, order, respect, harmony. Harmony, I laughed, but it came out more like a hiss. Is that what you call this? A system where your accomplishments are paraded around and mine are turned into cautionary tales. Where you get applause for breathing and I get punished for trying to do more. He shook his head, almost pityingly. It's always about you, isn't it? You're not the only Matthews. Eliza, you'd do well to remember that everything you have, your fancy job, your nice apartment in the city, that all comes from the foundation Dad built. Show some gratitude for once. I felt the heat rising in my cheeks, but I didn't back down. Funny, James, because you and I both know I built every piece of my career without him. Without any of you. His eyes narrowed, but before he could shoot back, our cousin Rachel rounded the corner, her timing impeccable. She took in the tension instantly, her eyes darting between us. Everything okay over here? She asked, her tone bright but her eyes concerned. Aunt Caroline's looking for you too. She wants everyone seated for dinner. James straightened his mask, snapping back into place. The perfect son. The heir apparent. Just catching up with my sister. Family business, he said smoothly, his voice warm enough that Rachel didn't press. He gave me one final look, that same smug tilt to his chin, before turning on his heel and disappearing back into the dining room. Rachel stayed behind for a second, glancing at me. You know, she said quietly, my mom always says your dad plays favorites like it's his full-time job. For what it's worth, I think you're the bravest one here. Her quiet kindness nearly cracked my armor. I gave her a tight smile, and squeezed her hand before she, too, slipped back into the dining room. I was alone again, the envelope in my purse feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I could feel its edges pressing into my side, the proof of every question I'd ever asked myself. Why didn't he love me? Why was I never enough? Why did I always feel like an outsider at my own table? The dinner bell chimed a soft note from the antique clock in the hall that signaled Mother's carefully orchestrated meal was ready to begin. I took a deep breath, then another. I could leave now. Slip out the side door, drive back to the city, and never come back. But another part of me, a fiercer part, refused. I wasn't going to slink away, like the scared, rejected child I'd been all my life. I adjusted my dress, smoothed my hair, and placed my hand lightly over my purse, feeling the envelope through the fabric. I was ready. Or at least, ready enough. Inside the dining room, the scene was exactly as it had always been. The heavy mahogany table that seated 20, yet somehow felt as cold and empty as a boardroom. The portraits of stern-faced ancestors glaring down from their gilded frames, like they were the judges in this twisted family trial. Mother had outdone herself with the table setting. Fine china that probably hadn't seen a real meal since the Clinton administration. Crystal glasses that caught the warm chandelier light and scattered it across the polished wood. Place cards arranged with military precision. Though the arrangement itself said everything about the family pecking order, I found my name where I knew it would be. Near the end of the table, next to a cousin's husband I barely knew and a junior associate Dad liked to trot out to show off his mentorship skills. Meanwhile, James sat in the prime spot beside Dad, his wife on his other side, their children nestled between. Sophia and her husband anchored the other side buffers to keep the inner circle neat and contained. Mother, always the picture of control, sat at the opposite end, close enough to smile but far enough to stay out of Dad's direct line of fire. I took my seat, my back straight, my shoulders squared. The envelope in my purse was a secret, a loaded weapon only I knew about, and tonight I was ready to use it. The dinner unfolded with all the forced elegance I'd come to expect from a Matthews gathering. 5 courses, white-gloved staff, and conversations so carefully curated it felt more like a corporate networking event than a family meal. Father lifted his glass, commanding silence with just a glance. He never needed to raise his voice. Family and friends, he began, his tone polished like a politician's. Each year reminded how fortunate I am to have not just built a business, but a legacy. A legacy carried on by my children. His eyes swept the table, lingering on James, who straightened proudly. Then to Sophia, who dipped her head modestly. Then barely a flicker my way. A glance so quick you'd think I'd imagined it. He went on, praising James' expansion of the real estate arm. How the Riverside project was a testament to the Matthews instinct for spotting opportunity. James leaned back, pretending humility but wearing a smile that told everyone he felt exactly as special as Dad said he was. And Sophia, Dad continued, his tone softening just slightly, her work with the Children's Hospital Board has brought such honor to the Matthews name. True success means giving back to the community, not just taking. Sophia managed a tight smile. She'd always hated being the center of attention, and then there was the pause, the moment I knew was coming. The same practiced omission that said more than words ever could. No mention of me. Not a word about my promotion, my divisions, record returns, or the car parked outside that he was all too happy to claim as his own treat to himself. He lifted his glass. To family, may we always know our place within it. A low hum of polite laughter and glass clinking drifted around the table. I stared down at my plate, my fork trembling slightly in my hand. Know our place, I thought. That had always been the rule. Dad's world was ordered: James the heir, Sophia the peacemaker, and me, the reminder of a mistake no one talked about. Dinner crept on. The conversation turned to politics and zoning permits topics. Dad loved because they kept him in his element, the authority on everything. My mother tried just once to slip my promotion into the conversation. Eliza's division did remarkably well last quarter, but Dad cut her off without so much as a glance. Henry, he called down the table to one of his old business partners. What's your take on the new development permits near the Cambridge corridor? Think they'll hold value? And that was that. The moment swallowed up like it never existed. Mom's eyes fell to her lap. I saw the small tremor in her hands as she folded her napkin, the tiny rebellion of mentioning me quickly punished. When the fish course was cleared, Dad turned his attention to me like he always did, once the audience had been sufficiently reminded of who really mattered. Elisa, he said, swirling the wine in his glass, you're still doing mostly domestic investments, correct? I met his eyes evenly. Our international division integrated my risk assessment model last quarter. Our performance outpaced the market by 22 points. He gave a dismissive wave. Numbers, on paper. When the next recession hits, let's see how that holds up. A few guests shifted in their seats, suddenly very interested in their glasses of Bordeaux. Sophia winced, but said nothing. James wore a smirk so faint only I would catch it. I forced a polite smile, the same one I wore for difficult clients. We'll see, I said coolly. History favors the bold. The next blow came disguised as concern. Mrs. Petersuna, family friend who'd known me since I was in braces, leaned forward with that cloying, patronizing smile. Eliza, dear, Richard says you're still single. Such a beautiful, accomplished young woman. Are the men in New York intimidated by you? Before I could answer, Dad cut in. Eliza's always been more interested in proving herself than building something lasting. Family requires compromise, something the Matthews women have always understood better than she does. There it was. The old knife, slid in under the ribs so smoothly the wound didn't even bleed at first. Mother started to protest, her voice small. Richard, he talked right over her. Perhaps if she hadn't dismissed every suitable young man I introduced, she wouldn't be alone in her 30s. It was so quiet you could hear the clink of silverware as people avoided eye contact, eyes glued to their plates. A few stifled awkward coughs. My pulse thudded in my ears. But I kept my expression neutral. I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. I appreciate your concern for my personal fulfillment, Father, I said, each word as steady as my breathing. But as you've often reminded me, the Matthews value results, and my results speak for themselves. A silence fell over the table like a dropped curtain. James cleared his throat, clearly itching to change the subject. Sophia looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. I felt the envelope in my purse like a heartbeat. I could feel its truth pressing against my hip bone. Undeniable. Unchangeable. A loaded truth I was suddenly tired of carrying alone. Dad leaned back in his chair, brandy in hand, his face flushed from drink and self-satisfaction. Some people, he announced to no one in particular, measure success by titles and salaries, but real legacy, real family is about who stays and builds, not who tries to outshine everyone else. My mother's eyes glistened with something like regret. I looked around at the faces I'd known all my life, their polite smiles and averted gazes, and I truly knew that it was time. I straightened my back. Tonight, I would stop being the secret. As dessert plates were cleared and the staff began offering coffee and brandy, I felt a strange calm settle in my chest. It was the stillness before a storm you can't outrun. My hand drifted to my purse again, fingertips brushing the crisp edge of that envelope, my silent companion through months of doubt and dread. Dad leaned back in his chair, swirling his snifter, satisfied with the mess he'd made. The conversation picked up around him in forced fits and starts. A cousin whispered about her new condo, someone complimented the souffle. All just background noise to the tension humming beneath the surface. Then he did what he always did. He stood, pushing his chair back a fraction. The signal. The room fell into hush as everyone turned to listen to Richard Matthews, the king addressing his loyal court. "Before we move out to the garden for the annual family photo," he said, voice carrying with that air of benevolence he'd perfected, "I'd like to say a few words. Family, like any good business, requires vision, loyalty, and a shared understanding of roles. We've built something remarkable here, a name people respect, a legacy that will endure." His eyes settled on James, who gave a practiced nod, playing his part. Then Sophia, who offered a small, polite smile. And then just for a heartbeat in me. But he looked through me, not at me. He raised his glass. "To my children, who understand what it means to uphold this name, to carry it forward." A wave of warmth and approval swept toward James, then Sophia, but nothing reached me. I wasn't even an afterthought, I was a ghost in the room. Then he paused, a wicked glimmer behind his eyes that only I could see. "Some people," he added, letting his gaze land on me now, sharp and deliberate, "measure success by the size of their paycheck, the car they drive, or the fancy titles they collect. But real success comes from loyalty. From knowing where you belong, and who you are." A low chuckle rippled through a few guests, nervous, unsure if they were meant to laugh. I felt the familiar flush of humiliation rise in my chest. But something inside me stayed steady, like a wire pulled tight. Mother's fork clinked against her plate as she shifted, her face pale. Sophia's eyes darted to me, full of apology she couldn't speak aloud. I could have stayed quiet. I could have forced the tears down, pretended not to care like I had my whole life. But my fingers closed around the envelope like it was a lifeline. I stood up. The chair scraping softly behind me sounded louder than the chatter that died immediately. 20 faces turned, some curious, some horrified, some like James mildly annoyed. Dad cocked his head, brandy glass frozen midair. "Eliza." His tone was casual, but I heard the warning beneath it. "Sit down. Be quiet. Don't embarrass me." "Thank you for the toast, Father," I began, my voice carrying clearer than I expected. 32 years I've sat at this table, trying to figure out exactly who I am, who I had to be to deserve your respect, and I finally understand. A ripple went through the room, the sudden cold gust of a secret about to slip loose. Dad's face hardened, the mask slipping just enough to show the crack. "I've built my own life, my own success, without your name propping me up," I said, my voice steady, "but there's a reason I never fit your mold. A reason I never measured up." I pulled the envelope out of my purse and laid it gently on the white tablecloth in front of him. A single sheet of paper that weighed more than a decade of unspoken questions. "I'm not your daughter," I said. The words dropped into the silence like a stone into still water. "Not by blood, anyway. I took a test. The proof is right there." Mother let out a small, strangled gasp. James shifted in his seat, anger and disbelief warring across his face. Sophia covered her mouth with her hand, eyes wide with a sadness so deep it made my heart twist. Dad didn't move at first. He just stared at the envelope, brandy glass shaking slightly. Then, like a man desperate to keep control of the story, he forced a tight smile. "What are you talking about, Eliza? What is this performance?" "It's not a performance," I said quietly. "It's the truth. The one you've known for years. And used to punish me for existing." The air felt electric, like the room itself was holding its breath. I saw cousins leaning closer, old family friends glancing uncomfortably at each other. For once, they were seeing the cracks in the Matthews facade. Every snide comment, every time you undermined me, I continued, my voice unshaking now. "You weren't pushing me to be better. You were punishing me for not being yours. And you know what? You were right about one thing. I don't belong here. Not under your rules. Not under your name." Dad's jaw clenched. "Enough," he hissed, low but vicious. "Sit down." I shook my head. "No. I've sat down enough for a lifetime." I pushed the envelope a few inches closer, its corners perfectly squared on the fine linen. "This is my gift to you, Dad. Happy Father's Day." I didn't wait for his response. Didn't need it. I stepped back from the table, my heels clicking against the marble floor as I turned away from the faces frozen in shock. The air felt lighter with every step. Behind me, I heard a chair scrape violently. A voice, James, I think, called after me, but I didn't look back. Not this time. At the front door, I paused just long enough to grab my purse and keys. The Mercedes my attempt to buy love sat, gleaming under the estate lights like a monument to all the wrong things I'd sacrificed. I pressed the unlock button. The chirp of the car felt like freedom. The night air hit me like a baptism as I stepped out onto the grand porch, leaving behind the murmur of confused voices and a tension that could choke a room twice its size. From inside, I heard a muffled shout, James, probably his voice taut, with that same old loyalty to the man whose approval we'd both been trained to crave. But the deeper I breathed in the cool Boston night, the clearer it became. I didn't have to crave it anymore. I'd spent a lifetime trying to buy something that was never on sale. The Mercedes sat like a ghost in the driveway, its polished black frame catching the moonlight and reflecting the windows of the house I'd tried so hard to belong to. I'd bought that car to say, "Look, Dad, I've made it. I'm good enough now." But now it looked back at me like a mirror, a reminder that no gift could ever rewrite a truth that had been hidden in my blood from day one. I slid into the driver's seat, the leather still smelling new and sharp-tinged with the faintest trace of his cologne from that smug test drive. I paused with my hands on the wheel, the house framed perfectly in the rearview mirror, grand, manicured, and cold as stone. I could almost see him through the bay windows, pacing, fists clenched around that opened envelope, the last piece of control slipping through his fingers. The engine purred to life when I pressed the ignition. Quiet and expensive, the hum of a decision that would echo long after the keys left my hand. I backed out of the driveway, tires crunching over the perfect gravel path that had led so many guests to this gilded prison. At the end of the drive, I stopped. Just for a second, I looked back one last time. And in that final glance, I felt it, the last tether snapping loose. He couldn't define me anymore. His silence, his scorn, his cold backhanded guidance, none of it would ever have the same weight again. I pulled onto the main road, the thick trees that lined the Matthews estate giving way to the open stretch of road into Boston. The farther I drove, the lighter my chest felt. I wasn't racing away from my past, I was driving right through it, taking back every piece of me I'd handed over for a few scraps of praise. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat, lighting up the darkness with a flood of missed calls and frantic texts. "Dad is going crazy. Where are you? Eliza, you can't do this." Sophia's name flashed again and again, but so did James's. And even my mother's. For the first time in my life, I didn't owe them an explanation. Not yet. Maybe not ever. A few miles out, I pulled over onto a quiet overlook that gave me a view of the Boston skyline. The city glittered across the water, my city. The place I'd built myself from scratch. No father's name stamped on my resume. No legacy propping me up. Just grit, sleepless nights, and the stubborn belief that one day, my work would speak louder than his dismissals. I sat there for a while, watching the skyline flicker in the night breeze, the lights smearing like a painting on the water's surface. For the first time in years, my mind felt still. The test was done, the secret was out, and the world hadn't ended. In fact, it felt like it was just beginning. When I finally put the car back in gear, I didn't drive toward my apartment in New York. I pointed the Mercedes toward a downtown Boston hotel instead. I needed the night alone, no reminders, no family, just silence. A place to breathe and sleep without wondering if the next sunrise would bring another disappointment disguised as advice. Inside the hotel room, I sat on the edge of the bed, phone buzzing in my palm. I opened Sophia's messages first. Her words read like the echo of my own confusion. "Liz, please. What did you show him? What does this mean? I'm so sorry. I love you. Are you safe?" It stung to read, because if anyone had tried to stand between me and Dad's barbed tongue over the years, it was Sophia. Sweet, careful Sophia, the only person who ever slipped into my room after the shouting to say, "It's not you, it's him." I didn't respond yet. I just sat there, the soft hum of the city outside my window. The Mercedes parked far below in the valet lot, like the final relic of a role I was done playing. My mother's name popped up next, several missed calls. Each voicemail, more frantic than the last. The final one cracked halfway through. "Eliza, please come home. We can explain everything. It's not what you think." But wasn't it? The test didn't lie. He wasn't my father, not in the way that counted. He'd known and punished me for it every chance he got. And maybe, just maybe, my mother had hidden behind him to protect herself from that truth too. One last ping brought me back to the present. A single text from James. The golden child. the prince of Dad's empire. Return the car or you'll hear from our lawyer. I laughed, sharp and humorless, alone in that spotless hotel room. Our lawyer. The Matthews way punishment and control. Nothing new there. I walked to the window and looked down at the city. That had given me everything he'd refused to. A fresh start. Proof that I could build my own name, my own worth. Without his stamp of approval, in that moment, I knew exactly what I'd do next. The Mercedes would be returned. All right, but not as an apology. I'd reclaim every cent of my investment in his empty affection and funnel it back where it belonged, into my life, my future. The family name could keep its car. I was done paying the price for it, and in that tiny hotel room, with Boston glowing, in the darkness below, I said it out loud for the first time just to hear how it sounded. I'm free. The next morning, I woke up before dawn, the city still half asleep, the skyline outside my window tinted lavender and gold. I didn't feel the usual dread in my chest. No knots in my stomach about what message might be waiting on my phone. For once, the quiet hum inside me wasn't anxiety, it was a steady, resolute calm. I brewed hotel room coffee that tasted like burnt plastic, but felt like a small ritual of reclaiming normalcy. My phone was still a buzzing mess of unanswered calls. Sophia again. A single new message from my mother. Please, let's talk face to face. Not like this. I could feel the pull of her words, years of being trained to smooth things over, to patch up the cracks Dad made so they wouldn't ruin the family portrait. But something in me had shifted so fundamentally that I couldn't just go back. Not this time. Instead, I called my lawyer. His voicemail picked up. I left a calm, short message. Hey Dan, I'll need your help with formally transferring the car back to Richard Matthews. Let's make sure every paper is airtight. I'm done buying love. The simple act of saying it out loud to someone else turned the thought into action. No more performances. No more begging for scraps of praise. That would never come. I was done playing their game. After I showered, I packed my overnight bag, checked out of the hotel, and stepped into the Boston morning air. I drove the Mercedes to a dealership near Cambridge, the same one that had delivered it just days before. The salesperson's eyes widened when I pulled up. Miss Matthews, everything okay with the car? He asked politely, maybe sensing from my tight smile that this wasn't exactly a routine drop-off. It's not for me, I said simply. I'm returning it. I'll have my attorney coordinate the paperwork. I handed over the spare key fob like it was a snake. I'd finally uncoiled from around my neck. The entire transaction took 15 minutes. 15 minutes to unravel years of overcompensation. Years of trying to buy my place in a story that was never written for me. When I walked back out to the street, the dealership doors slid shut behind me with a quiet whoosh. I stood there, bag slung over my shoulder, feeling lighter than I had in years. No car. No more bribes for affection. Just me. I called an Uber to Logan Airport. The driver didn't ask questions when I asked him to wait while I changed my destination halfway through. At first, I was going to fly back to New York, hole up in my apartment, and let the storm settle on its own. But the thought of that sterile high-rise made my stomach twist. I didn't want to be alone with my thoughts, not yet, so I did what I hadn't done in over a decade. I called my mother. She answered on the first ring, breathless. Eliza, it's me, I said. I'll meet you. One time. One place. But this is my choice. She didn't argue, didn't push. We settled on a little cafe near the public garden. Neutral ground. No Matthews Manor looming over us. No heavy portraits of ancestors who'd looked down on the bastard child. Just a table, 2 chairs, and the truth that had waited 32 years to come out. When I arrived, she was already there. Caroline Matthews, always so perfectly put together, looked like she'd aged 10 years since the night before. But she didn't look fragile. She looked real. And for the first time, I saw the young woman she must have been when she found herself alone, pregnant, and cornered by a family more concerned with reputation than her heart. She reached for my hand as soon as I sat down. Her fingers were cold, but her grip was strong. I never wanted you to find out that way, she whispered. Her eyes brimmed with tears she was determined not to let fall. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, my voice low but steady. Why did you let him treat me like that? Why did you stand by while he punished me for something I didn't choose? Her shoulders sagged as if the question itself pressed her to the table. Because I thought I could protect you by keeping it buried. I told myself that love could be enough. That if I gave you enough, it would balance out what he couldn't give. But love with secrets is never whole. I see that now. I wanted to stay angry, to hold on to that fire. But sitting there, watching my mother crack open her truth, I saw something else. A woman who'd been manipulated, a woman who'd traded one prison for another because the world hadn't offered her many choices. "I'm sorry for what you went through," I said finally. "And I meant it. But you let him break me for it." Over and over. Her eyes filled then, no stopping the tears this time. "I did. And that's on me. But Eliza, you have always been more than how he saw you. You have always been mine. And that part, nothing changes that." I let her words settle in the space between us. A fragile bridge. Not enough to cross yet, but maybe enough to build. On. We talked for an hour about Thomas Keller, the young engineer who'd been my real father in blood if not in name, about how she'd found him years later, on alumni lists but never had the courage to reach out, about how she wondered, late at night, if he'd have treated me better. And as the cafe bustled around us, it hit me, maybe the question wasn't whether Thomas Keller would have been a better father. Maybe the question was who I wanted to be, now that I knew whose blood ran through my veins and whose didn't. When we stood to leave, my mother pulled me in for a hug that felt nothing like the stiff, showy embraces at the Matthews reunions. This one was real, raw, and when she pulled back, she pressed something into my palm. "Whatever you decide to do next, do it for you," she said. "Not for him. Not for me. For you." I looked down at what she'd given me, a small photograph, edges yellowed with time. A young man with kind eyes and messy hair, arms slung around my mother's shoulders. Both of them laughing like the world was simple. Thomas Keller, my biological father. A ghost I would soon have to meet face to face. But, for now, I slipped the photo into my pocket. Proof that my story wasn't over. It was just finally mine to tell. After the cafe, I didn't rush back to New York. Instead, I booked a small Airbnb in Beacon Hill for the rest of the week. A quiet brownstone apartment with creaky floors and too much sunlight pouring through lace curtains. It felt like exactly the opposite of my sleek Manhattan high-rise. And that's what I needed. Space that felt uncurated, unpolished. Somewhere, I could sit with the truth and decide how much of it I wanted to carry forward. I spent hours just walking through the neighborhood, passing red brick sidewalks and people who didn't know my name or my family's story. I bought a journal at a tiny corner bookstore. An indulgence. Since I hadn't kept a real journal since I was a teenager, hiding entries under my mattress. But this time, I wanted every page to be mine alone. No father, reading between the lines. No mother editing my words, with well-meaning silence. One night, sitting by the bay window with that empty journal in my lap, I wrote down a single question. If I never needed to prove myself to him again, what would I do with that freedom? The answer didn't come right away. And maybe that was the point. Maybe it was enough that the question no longer ended with "for him." Meanwhile, the Matthews family machine ground on without me. Sophia texted updates daily. James, predictably, was fuming. He'd left a few curt voicemails, warning me that dragging family skeletons into the open would ruin Dad's standing in the real estate community. But I didn't feel fear. Just a dull, almost amused detachment. What was left to ruin? The golden pedestal had always been an illusion, built on secrets, performances, and the unspoken agreement that we'd all keep pretending. I'd simply opted out of the charade. Mother checked in once, too. A single message that read, "I know you need time. I'll be here when you're ready. I love you." And for the first time in years, I believed it. Not because she said it perfectly, but because she didn't try to twist my anger into guilt. She let it exist beside her love. My boss back in New York was surprisingly gracious when I asked for a few extra days away. "You're good at what you do, Eliza," she said. "Sort this out however you need to. The work will be here when you're ready." There was no edge to her tone, no hint that my worth was up for reevaluation. I realized how foreign that was to me, to be valuable without being on trial for it every minute. And then, midweek, an email appeared in my inbox. Its subject, lines so simple that my breath caught. "Hello, Eliza. Thomas Keller." Ed almost forgotten I'd written to him. A cautious, trembling note sent through a generic alumni contact form, half hoping he'd ignore it, but he hadn't. I clicked it open with shaky hands. "Eliza, I don't quite know how to respond to a lifetime in a single message. But I want you to know this. I never knew you existed. If I had, you would never have felt invisible. I am in Boston next week for a conference. If you're willing, I would like to meet you. No expectations, just an honest conversation, face to face. I will follow your lead. Thomas." I read it 3 times. 4. A line in the middle made my eyes sting. You would never have felt invisible. Such a small promise from someone who'd never even been given the chance to break it. Maybe he would disappoint me, maybe he wouldn't, but I owed it to myself to find out, to hear my story from someone who hadn't weaponized my existence to prop up his own legacy. Sophia was the first person I told about Thomas's message. She called me that night, her voice warm and protective, just like when we were kids, sneaking cookies after lights out. Are you going to meet him? She asked. I think so, I said, staring out the window at the dusky city. Not because I need a replacement father, but because I want the truth, and maybe a piece of myself that's been missing. I get it, she said softly. He might not have been there then, but he can be here now, if you want him to be. We talked for hours, not just about Thomas, but about everything we'd never said out loud before. About how she'd felt like a buffer between me and Dad's worst instincts. How she'd resented James's smug loyalty but hadn't known how to challenge it. How she wished she'd done more to stand up for me, and how she would now. The next day, I called Thomas. His voice was gentle, deeper than I'd imagined, with that slight measured tone of someone who spends his life solving puzzles. When I told him I wanted to meet, he didn't make any grand declarations. Just a quiet thank you for giving me a chance. That was enough. That was everything. We agreed to keep it simple. Coffee, public place, no audience, no family drama trailing behind us like shadows. Just 2 people, strangers, bound by DNA and the question of what it could mean to know each other now. I hung up feeling more nervous than I had been before my first job interview, but there was no pitch to make, no resume to prove. Just me, just him, just the truth, unvarnished and unsold. As I lay in that squeaky bed that night, a tiny smile tugged at my lips. For the first time, the weight of my last name felt lighter, like I could set it down whenever I wanted and pick up something entirely my own. And maybe, just maybe, that was the start of becoming someone I didn't have to apologize for being. I met Thomas at a quiet cafe on the Upper West Side the following week. It was one of those rainy New York mornings that made the city feel softer somehow, all the edges blurred under umbrellas and the hiss of car tires on wet asphalt. Got there first. Mostly because I couldn't stand the thought of walking in late. Of him already sitting there waiting for me like so many childhood memories of my father tapping his watch in disappointment. But Thomas wasn't Richard. He walked in a few minutes after I sat down, tall, slightly stooped from years, hunched over engineering projects. Hair more salt than pepper, and eyes that looked so much like mine that I had to look away for a second just to breathe. Eliza, he said simply, his voice carrying none of the strained performance I was so used to. He pulled out the chair across from me like he'd done this 1,000 times before. Even though it was our very first moment in the same room. The first few minutes were awkward, of course they were. How could they not be? He asked about my work, not in that patronizing way my father always did, but genuinely curious. Fascinated when I told him about the risk assessment model I'd developed. He asked thoughtful follow-ups, wanting to understand the mechanics rather than turning it into some twisted referendum on whether it was good enough. You get that from me. You know, he said, smiling a little shyly. Numbers never lie. They just need the right questions. We talked for over 2 hours. About Boston, about his work in clean energy, about the twin sons he'd raised with his wife out in San Francisco. He told me about their childhoods, stories that, strangely, didn't sting. Instead, they felt like puzzle pieces clicking into place. This was the kind of fathering I'd always wanted, not perfect, but present. Not a kingdom builder, but a bridge builder? And when he told me about my mother, I saw her in a new light too, not just as the polished matriarch she'd tried to be, but as a young woman in love with a man her family didn't approve of, making impossible choices in a world that judged her before she'd even graduated college. I thought she might find me one day, he admitted, his hands wrapped tight around his coffee mug, but she never did. And when I got your email, Eliza, I want you to know, you didn't ruin anything. You gave me something I didn't know I'd been missing. It was so different from the letter my father's lawyer had sent me. No threats, no blame. Just the truth, simple and messy and healing. Afterward, we walked a few blocks together under my umbrella. He asked if we could meet again, maybe dinner next time, or a walk through Central Park if the weather was kind. And I found myself saying, yes, not because I needed him to fill the void Richard left, but because I wanted to choose this connection. For once, I wanted to say yes because I wanted to. Not because I was performing for someone else's expectations. When I got back to my apartment, the one I'd worked for on my own merit, I sat at my kitchen counter with that old envelope, the DNA test that had once felt like a death sentence for the girl who spent her whole life begging to belong. Now it felt like my permission slip, my freedom letter. In the months that followed, I didn't rush into any big declarations. I didn't cut off my mother, and I didn't push Thomas into some sitcom version of fatherhood either. Instead, we built it slow: phone calls, stories, photos of me as a baby that my mother sent him when she was ready to be part of that truth too. Sophia stayed my anchor. She called every week, sometimes just to talk about nonsense like new recipes or the kids' soccer games, sometimes to remind me that my worth had never been measured by the man at the head of that big mahogany table. And James, well, some people stay exactly who they are. He kept defending Richard's legacy, clinging to the lie that the family image was more important than the individual truth. I let him. He'd built his whole life on it. It wasn't my job to bulldoze his foundation just because mine had changed. Richard never called. Not once. And the Mercedes. I sold it. I wired the money into my own investment portfolio, a quiet middle finger to the decades I'd spent spending my time, money and spirit trying to buy my way into his pride. This Thanksgiving, I didn't go back to the big house in Boston. I sat at Sophia's kitchen table instead, helping her kids cut paper turkeys and laughing so hard at something her husband said that I nearly snorted wine through my nose. And when my mother called to say she was thankful for my forgiveness, I realized that maybe this was the real family, the one you choose. The one that doesn't come with conditions. As the night wound down, I stood by Sophia's window, looking out at her quiet street. My phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. "Happy Thanksgiving, Eliza. I'm thankful you found me." I didn't feel the ache in my chest like I once would have. I felt light instead, like my worth no longer needed an audience, like I was enough because I said so. I turned my phone off, set it on the windowsill, and went back to the table to help with dessert. So if you're watching this, wondering if you're allowed to walk away from someone who will never see you for who you really are, let this be your sign. You are. You don't owe anyone your soul just because they gave you a name. Family is what you choose to keep, not what someone else demands you carry. Thank you for listening to my story. If it helped you see your own worth a little clearer, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, you don't have to prove anything to someone who refuses to see you. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the permission to let go.